Simon, Friday, in the last half hour of our show, it broke while we were on. The Independent Commission docked Everton 10 points for breaching profit and sustainability rules. Clubs are allowed to lose £105 million over 3 years. Everton lost over 350 million quid. There were arguments over allowable losses regards COVID, the new stadium, etc. The upshot was, Simon, it ended with 20 million above the allowed limit. Yeah. And I think that is that being missed, Simon, in a whole bunch of quarters, that 20 million is 20 million, but that's what it's got to. Don't think it's a huge figure, although 20 million isn't inconsiderable. It's 20 million. But it's now set for another points deduction, Everton, as Burnley, Leeds, Leicester might well look for compensation. They argue a points deduction should have been heard last season. This would have been held by another panel, and the concern there is that Everton could well be hit by a fine or another points deduction. Now that the dust is settled for the time being on this, where's your head with it? How worried should Evertonians be?
Well, the rules are the rules, and if these clubs wanted a faster track and a different process, then they, like any other member of the Premier League, can chair a motion to fast-track these sort of procedures into a far more funneled and time-sensitive criteria.
Yeah.
Given that isn't the case, and given that they haven't done that, then it's very difficult to see how they can argue against the principles of how long it takes to adjudicate, in the same way that other people could suggest that the Man City scenario, albeit more complicated and convoluted than the Everton one, is taking a passage of time. These are the rules that you guys signed up for as members of the Premier League. If you want to change those rules, you change them. And then you move into the argument of the reality of who's going to be doing what to whom and how. It's very difficult to fathom how they can anticipate that three clubs, or anyone can anticipate that three clubs are going to have any real reason. First of all, the £20 million loss. You're right, Jim, it's not admirable because it starts with the fact that the business has a ridiculous concept that you can actually allow to lose 105 million. So every other industry, governance says you should be a viable business. You should operate with a customer-facing perspective. Football says this is the amount of money you're allowed to lose as governance. And beyond that, Everton have gone way beyond it. Now, there's a whole raft of other football clubs that have lost lots of money during that period of time, predominantly because of COVID and loss of revenues. So they will have all lost big numbers of money. Everton's was substantial, and they managed to get it down to a certain level, which was within 20% of the allowable amount. I don't think there's a feeling of empathy or sympathy. I think there's a feeling of surprise that the Premier League have, A, had the balls to do it, and B, given it to the quantum they've given it. Now, if you look at the situation in factual terms and you see Portsmouth having gone into administration, the overall biggest way of getting out of obligations and the biggest meltdown of a football club is to go into administration or liquidation. They got 9 points for going into administration.
Yeah.
Everton, for breaching the financial fair play governance by 20%, have gotten a bigger penalty than a football club that's gone into administration. So it makes it almost seem like a slightly disproportionate circumstance. It also,
I mean by sympathy over the weekend, Sam, I mean, you said in a column you did on Friday night.
I think it's harsh.
That it's harsh.
It's not sympathy. That's just
ridiculously harsh.
I do think it's harsh,
that they are a victim of their times.
Yep.
Ollie Holt, another well-respected journalist, Everton are a blood sacrifice to show the Premier League can bring order to the Wild West.
Well, I think both myself and...
The thing is, they're rule breakers.
I think, yeah, indeed. But then, okay, so the Everton...
Sorry, Evertonians, but Everton are rule breakers.
But the idea, I think the idea that I'm advancing, with some degree of merit, I think, and so would Ollie Holt, is that the product of the timing is that there is a need for the Premier League to suggest to the incoming independent regulator that the limit of their powers doesn't need to be as expansive as certain quarters may want it to be. So if you appoint an independent commission, because this is not the Premier League that have sanctioned, the Premier League haven't sanctioned Everton, they're the instrument that deploys the penalty.
Right, the independent commission.
The independent commission that's been put in place by the Premier League. But I'm not entirely sure the appetite to put in place an independent commission would have been so robust if there wasn't an impending independent regulator coming down the tracks.
Correct.
So the point that myself...
The Premier League were pushing for 12 points.
Well, because the Premier League were representing themselves in a case that was going to be adjudicated by other people, and Everton had their opportunity to defend themselves against the observations put forward by the Premier League. But my point is the Premier League would be suggesting they want to be quite strong. So it sends out a strong message to those that are looking and those that are critical and those that suggest that there isn't the gumption or the teeth in the ideals behind financial fair play.
Yeah.
that they want strong sanctioning.
And you applaud them for that?
I applaud them for being robust in their thinking.
Because it's about time, isn't it, that something is done about something like this?
I've been an advocate.
You've been calling for this.
Simon, is the mechanism fair, spread over 3 years? So obviously the club. Well, because now the clubs are looking to perhaps sue, aren't they? And we can't really work out which season this is all sort of which season.
But those are the rules.
But the mechanism, is it the right one?
There's another way of doing it because
could we not have a salary cap instead? Could they not change it? Could the system at the moment should that be looked at?
They can change it to be able to try and meet certain obligations.
Because everyone's kind of fixed.
But there's been a tacit resistance. If you put up the idea of a salary cap, out will come the ever solution-orientated PFA with their objections to it. They're not interested in the viability of football clubs. They're interested in the viability of their members.
Right.
So with that in mind, a 3-year cycle also enables you to be able to trade properly, to sell players. So the defined period of economic sustainability is over 3 years for good reason, because sometimes you have a good season, sometimes you can sell players, sometimes you can't.
Sure.
So in this situation, I do agree that it could be more immediate and review accounts on a yearly basis, but it's not sustainable in a football cycle.
But Sammy, my point is, over the weekend, you, Holt and others, it seems that the overriding feeling is one seemingly of sympathy, and that Everton are being hard done by here.
No, but you're missing the detail.
The rule.
But you're missing the detail. It's got nothing to do with giving them a pass. It's to look at the sanction itself. And I'm just giving you an example of what I consider to be a far more compelling situation, which is going into administration to duck your responsibilities, to repackage yourself in a far better format.
And that is correct.
So that, to my mind, makes it harsher. And I do think that I'm not sympathetic.
They didn't pay their bills.
What I actually said in the article was how ridiculous was Mashiri's statements. How ridiculous was the argument put forward by Colin Chong, which is, we're horrified and amazed by this decision, but we know that we were guilty. So make your mind up. You can't be horrified and amazed. The only thing you're horrified and amazed about is not that you're guilty, it's about the quantum of the sentence. So the language that was being put out by Everton, I'm not sympathetic with. I do have a degree of empathy that a 10-point penalty, and given the fact it's the first of its kind and it's precedent setting, everyone's going to have some form of reaction.
Does this open a Pandora box now then? Will we see a succession of other situations with other clubs that we know about that have charges against them, and Chelsea bring new owners bringing things to the table?
If they're guilty of something, one would hope that they're going to be sanctioned in the same way that Everton have been sanctioned, with the same sort of sentiments.
Yeah. The thing is this, Simon, as we head to the break, we'll carry on after 10:30. 2021 agreement. After discussions with the Premier League in August 2021, the league agreed that Everton would be able to exclude certain stadium expenditure, so we know that, from their loss calculations. In return for that, Everton were told, in no uncertain circumstances, they must seek approval from the Premier League for all players recruited in future transfer windows.
Which they did, because we discussed it regularly.
In the Commission's judgment, they claimed that Everton went on an overspend despite repeated warnings. Now, it said for Everton to have persisted in player purchase in the face of such plain warnings was recklessness. Now,
but that makes no sense.
We do know that, because after Lampard took over, Everton signed Dele Alli, followed by in the summer, a summer that saw Everton bring in Onana for 34 million, McNeil for 20, Mopé for 15. Garner 9, Guy 8.
But that makes no sense, because if the Premier League have put them under special measures, which is what we discussed,
right,
then the Premier League are the only people that are allowed to sanction the purchases of players and register them. So the Premier League would have known specifically and explicitly that Everton were doing this.
Nonetheless, was Everton spending not irresponsible, even after what they've been told in 2021?
If Everton believe, first and foremost, Everton was selling players to be able to buy players. So look at the net situation. Look at the sale of Richarlison. Look at the sale of Lucas Digne to Aston Villa and
Anthony
the purchase
Gordon.
of Mykolenko. So Everton were doing things and what they were allowed to do was every transaction they entered into had to better their position. So every time they sold a player, it bettered their position, and the money that was deployed could not then subsequently unwind the bettering of their position.
Simply, they've tried to work then with the Premier League, haven't they? They need to be applauded for that, and then they've thrown the book at them. So they haven't hid behind their lawyers.
The Commission conclude that Everton could be accused of poor judgment, financial irresponsibility, and deliberately misleading the Premier League.
Okay.
And that's what's got them in the hot water.
Well, that question will have to be answered by Everton, because I would imagine that the Premier League, given the fact they put them under special measures, would have put proper scrutiny. Now, if Everton are now being accused of lying to the Premier League, which is what this independent commission seems to be alluding to, they're lying to the Premier League.
Misleading.
Well, it's lying. Misleading, lying is one of the same thing, isn't it? Very close cousins. So let's have it in its most robust terms. They're lying to the Premier League to be able to sign players. Now, then, on that basis, then Everton put themselves in a very difficult position. But I would also suggest that if you put in special measures, it's also incumbent upon the people that register the players. If the Premier League are allowing you to register a player, they must have asked the question, does that better your position? What happened to the player that you sold? What did that do to your balance sheet? And what did this do? So if we're suggesting that
So legislation allows for that. They can block a purchase. They could have blocked it.
Well, they've put them into special measures, which is a basic policing of everything they do.
So you would argue the Premier League and the Commission would have had to have been across
the Commission,
every deal that Everton did.
The Commission,
certainly the Premier League,
not the Commission, because they've only been established to be able to review the facts after the event.
Right.
The Premier League, you would have expected to have been in a situation where they are telling Everton that you cannot run your football club the way that you've been running it for the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And so to do that, that's why they've not been spending big money recently and not been spending what they spent previously. If you look at the profligacy of buying players like Gylfi Sigurdsson for 50 million quid, you can see that not repeating itself very often in recent times.
Okay, all right. More on the Everton situation, because obviously there could be more coming Everton's way regards further punishment, whether that's a fine or whether that's legal action coming from 3 clubs. It's 10:30 this Monday morning.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.